The alien female commander roared angrily. "Who is this letter from?" A human soldier stepped forward. The observation deck smelled like burnt ozone and recycled fear. Commander Chloe stood with her back to the viewport, which was probably for the best. The view outside was less majestic cosmos and more catastrophic junkyard. Twisted chunks of hull plating drifted past like metallic tumbleweeds, occasionally sparking when they collided with something that used to be someone's ship. The battle had ended 4 hours ago, but the debris field would be around for weeks, a permanent reminder that space combat was less glorious and more everyone loses, but some lose worse. Her crew assembled before her in various states of exhaustion. Lieutenant Crace, her Telvari second-in-command, had a burn mark across his uniform that perfectly matched the scorch on the bulkhead behind him, proof that he'd been standing in exactly the wrong spot when the plasma conduit blew. Ensign Bella's tentacles were tied in what her species called a stress knot, which looked uncomfortable but apparently helped with anxiety. Chief Engineer Ramos was missing an eyebrow, though whether from the battle or another one of his creative repairs was anyone's guess. Chloe's amber skin was streaked with dust and something dark that might have been hydraulic fluid or blood. At this point, the ship had leaked so much of both that they were practically interchangeable. Her long ears, which swept back from her temples in elegant curves that would have looked graceful under better circumstances, were currently pinned flat against her skull. Everyone who'd served with her for more than a week knew what that meant. The commander was absolutely furious. In her hand, she held a piece of paper. Actual paper. In the year 2847, on a warship equipped with quantum communication arrays and holographic display matrices, someone had used paper. Chloe had forgotten paper even existed until she'd found this crumpled artifact tucked into her personal terminal, wedged behind the screen like a confession hidden in a high school locker. "Who?" she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Is this letter from?" The crew suddenly found the floor fascinating. 63 personnel, veterans of a dozen campaigns, warriors who'd stared down enemy dreadnoughts without flinching, and not one of them could meet her eyes. Crace coughed. Vela's tentacles tightened further. Ramos touched the spot where his eyebrow used to be, as if hoping it might grow back and distract everyone. Chloe's ears twitched. She uncrumpled the letter with deliberate slowness, the paper crackling in the silence like small arms fire. "Shall I read it aloud?" she asked sweetly, which made it worse. Sweet was never good. "Please don't," someone whispered from the back. It might have been Corporal Wines, but the voice was too strangled to tell. Chloe read anyway. "Commander, I know this is against protocol, but I had to tell you." She paused, letting that sink in. "When you led the charge against the Krell destroyers, I couldn't stop watching you. Even in battle, you move like starlight." "Oh no," Crace muttered. "Graceful and fierce and beautiful." Chloe's voice could have cut through hull plating. Beautiful. Someone on this crew looked at me, covered in coolant and yelling obscenities at a malfunctioning targeting array, and thought, beautiful. "To be fair, Commander," Ramos offered helpfully, "you do yell very elegantly." Chloe's glare could have powered the ship's main engines. Ramos wisely shut up. The silence stretched longer. Outside, a piece of debris bounced off the viewport with a pathetic tink, as if the universe itself was uncomfortable with the tension. The ventilation system cycled with a wheeze that suggested it was one more battle away from giving up entirely. Somewhere deep in the ship, something dripped. Then from the back of the assembly, a figure moved. The crew parted like a sea that really didn't want to get involved, revealing a young man in a human naval uniform that still had crisp edges. Michael Hayes transferred 3 months ago as part of the Interspecies Cooperation Initiative, which was military speak for "we need more bodies and humans breed fast." He was young, maybe 25 standard years, with dark hair that stuck up in directions that suggested either a recent battle or a recent nap. His uniform was cleaner than everyone else's, not because he was fastidious, but because he'd spent most of the battle in the secondary munitions bay, which hadn't seen action. His hands were steady, though, steadier than they had any right to be. "It's from me, Commander," Michael said quietly. 62 pairs of eyes swiveled to stare at him. Vela's tentacles actually loosened in shock. Chloe's ears stood straight up, which was somehow more terrifying than when they'd been flat. She looked at Michael like he was a particularly interesting malfunction in the ship's systems. Unexpected, inexplicable, and probably about to cause a cascade failure. "You," she said. "Me," Michael confirmed, because apparently he'd decided that if he was going down, he might as well do it honestly. The observation deck had never been quieter, which was saying something considering it was usually filled with the ambient hum of a warship trying very hard not to fall apart. Even the life support systems seemed to be holding their breath. Chloe stared at Michael with the kind of intensity usually reserved for targeting enemy vessels, and Michael, either incredibly brave or catastrophically stupid, stared back. "You," Chloe repeated as if saying it again might make it make sense. "Ensign Michael Hayes, human, assignment, munitions inventory specialist, time aboard, 3 months, 4 days. Her voice had gone from thunderous to ice cold, which everyone knew was worse. Thunder you could weather. Ice meant someone was about to get spaced. "Yes, Commander," Michael said. His voice didn't waver, which impressed some of the crew and horrified the rest. Crace leaned toward Vela and whispered, "How much do you think his life insurance pays out?" "Not enough," Vela whispered back, 2 of her tentacles making what might have been a sympathetic gesture. Chloe held up the letter, her long ears tilting forward in a way that would have been adorable if it wasn't absolutely terrifying. "You wrote this. You," she glanced at the paper again, "can't stop thinking about the way I laugh, even though I barely ever do anymore." She looked up. "When exactly have you heard me laugh, Ensign? Because I'm fairly certain the last time I laughed, you were still in grade school." 2 weeks ago, Commander," Michael said. "During the repair briefing, Chief Ramos made that joke about the Krell navigation systems being designed by committee, and you laughed. Just for a second, but you did." Ramos perked up. "See? My material lands." "Ramos, if you speak again, I'm reassigning you to waste reclamation," Chloe snapped, not taking her eyes off Michael. "Understood, Commander. Shutting up now, Commander." Chloe took 3 steps forward, her boots clicking against the deck plating with metronomic precision. The crew instinctively shifted back, creating a clear space between her and Michael like spectators at a duel. Outside the viewport, a piece of debris tumbled past, part of a Krell fighter, its hull still glowing faintly from atmospheric entry burn. It seemed almost peaceful compared to the tension inside. "Do you understand," Chloe said slowly, "what you've done? Do you have any concept of the regulations you violated? The chain of command you've," she gestured with the letter, "completely disrespected with this romantic gesture?" offered Ensign Wines helpfully. "Suicide note?" suggested another voice. "Cry for help?" someone else chimed in. "All of you, silent," Chloe roared, and the crew snapped to attention so fast that Corporal Jex pulled a muscle. She turned back to Michael, her amber eyes blazing. "Explain yourself. Now. And it had better be good, because right now the only thing keeping me from launching you out of an airlock is the paperwork involved." Michael took a breath. The smart thing would be to apologize, to claim temporary insanity brought on by battle stress, to blame it on a concussion or bad rations or literally anything that would let him escape with his dignity and career intact. Instead, he said, "I meant every word, Commander." Someone in the back actually gasped. It might have been all of them. "You what?" Chloe's ears flattened again, confusion mixing with anger in a way that made her expression almost comical. Almost. No one was brave enough to laugh. "I meant it," Michael continued, apparently having decided that in for a penny, in for a court-martial. "I've been on this ship for 3 months, and in that time, I've watched you run on 4 hours of sleep every night because you personally review every casualty report. I've seen you give your meal rations to junior crew members who forgot to eat during double shifts. I've heard you memorize the names of every single person who's died under your command, and I've seen you stand on this exact deck alone at 0300 hours just staring at the stars like you're trying to find answers they don't have." The observation deck was so quiet that the sound of Chloe's breathing was audible. Her hand, the one holding the letter, had started to shake. Whether from rage or something else, no one could tell. "Last week," Michael went on, "after the ambush near the Kepler belt, I saw you cry. Just for 30 seconds in the engine room when you thought no one was watching. Then you wiped your face, straightened your uniform, and went back to the bridge like nothing happened. You carry all of us, Commander, every single day. And I just thought, he faltered for the first time. Someone should tell you that we see it, that I see it, that you're more than just the weapon they've made you into. The silence that followed wasn't tense anymore. It was something else, something fragile and strange, like the moment between lightning and thunder, when the whole world holds still. Chloe opened her mouth, closed it. Her ears did something complicated that might have been a seizure or might have been the physical manifestation of a system crash. She looked down at the letter, then at Michael, then at the letter again. She started, then stopped. Behind her, a salvage drone drifted past the viewport, its running lights blinking in mindless routine. You're absolutely insane, she finally managed. Probably, Michael agreed. I'm human. It's kind of our thing. Despite everything, the regulations, the fury, the sheer audacity of it all, Chloe felt the corner of her mouth twitch. Just barely. Just enough. The twitch at the corner of Chloe's mouth vanished as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the iron mask of command she wore like a second skin. She turned sharply on her heel, addressing the assembled crew with the kind of authority that made even the bulkhead stand straighter. All of you, dismissed. Return to your stations. We have 3 damaged power relays, a navigation array that's held together with prayer and spite, and approximately 17 hours before the Krell regroup and come back to finish what they started. She paused, her voice dropping to something dangerous. And if I hear one word about this conversation in the mess hall, I will personally assign the guilty party to scrub the waste reclamation filters with a toothbrush. Their own toothbrush, understood? Yes, Commander. The response was immediate and unanimous. The crew filed out with impressive speed, though not so fast that they couldn't exchange meaningful glances and barely suppressed grins. Crace passed Michael and muttered, "Nice knowing you," in a tone that suggested he was already composing the eulogy. Vela patted Michael's shoulder with one tentacle in a gesture that might have been encouragement or condolence. With her species, it was hard to tell. Ramos paused at the doorway, turned back and opened his mouth. "Don't," Chloe said without looking. Ramos wisely chose survival and left. The door hissed shut, leaving Chloe and Michael alone on the observation deck. Outside, the debris field continued its slow, silent dance. A piece of plating tumbled past, catching starlight and throwing it in fractured patterns across the viewport. The ship's artificial gravity hummed beneath their feet, a reminder that they were standing on several thousand tons of metal and hope, floating in a void that didn't care whether they lived or died. Chloe walked to the viewport, her back to Michael. Her reflection in the reinforced glass was ghostly, translucent, less substantial than the woman herself. Her ears were doing something neutral now, neither pinned nor raised, just existing in a state of careful non-commitment. "Do you know why I chose this ship?" she asked quietly. "The Valiant Echo?" Michael, uncertain whether he was supposed to answer, stayed silent. It was the oldest vessel in the fleet that was still combat-rated. Commissioned in 2791, retrofitted 6 times, patched up so many times that there's barely any original hull left. Every systems engineer said it should have been decommissioned 15 years ago. She touched the viewport with one hand, fingers splayed against the cold surface. "Command offered me a brand new dreadnought, state-of-the-art, quantum shields, adaptive armor, AI-assisted targeting. I chose this rust bucket instead." "Why?" Michael asked, then immediately wondered if he should have kept quiet. Chloe's reflection smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Because new ships haven't learned to survive yet. They're all promise and potential, but they break the first time reality hits them. Old ships like the Echo, they're held together with scars and repairs and the memory of every battle they've survived. They know how to take a hit and keep going. They know that surviving isn't pretty. It's just necessary." She turned from the viewport, and Michael was struck by how tired she looked. Not physically tired, though she was certainly that. It was deeper. The kind of exhaustion that came from carrying weight that never got lighter, only heavier. "I can't afford to be seen as human, Michael. Well, I'm not human, obviously. But you understand what I mean? I can't be vulnerable. I can't be someone's. She glanced at the letter, still crumpled in her hand. Starlight. I'm a commanding officer in the middle of a war that's been going on since before you were born. Every decision I make determines who lives and who gets written up in a casualty report. Do you understand that? Yes, Commander. No, you don't. She said it without anger, just stating a fact. You can't. You've been here 3 months. You've seen 2 real engagements. I've been doing this for 17 years, and I've lost count of how many people I've watched die. At some point, you stop learning their favorite foods or their hometowns or their dreams because it hurts less when they're just designations on a crew manifest. Michael wanted to say something, anything, but the words stuck in his throat like shrapnel. And then you show up, Chloe continued, her voice almost wondering now. And you write a letter, an actual letter, on paper that you somehow requisitioned from supplies. And I really want to know how you manage that, by the way, because we haven't had paper in inventory for 6 years. I traded my dessert rations for 2 months, Michael admitted. To Ensign Vela, she had some in her personal effects. Chloe blinked. You gave up dessert for 2 months, for paper, to write me a love letter. Yes, Commander. The dessert rations include chocolate substitute, the real stuff, from Earth. I know, Commander. You're absolutely deranged, but there was no heat in it anymore. She looked at the letter again, smoothing it against her palm with surprising gentleness. You wrote that I move like starlight. Do you have any idea how ridiculous that sounds? I move like someone who's pulled a hamstring and is pretending it doesn't hurt because she can't show weakness in front of the crew. Graceful starlight with a pulled hamstring then, Michael offered, and immediately regretted it. But Chloe laughed. Actually laughed. It was short and surprised, like the sound had escaped before she could stop it. But it was real. Her ears did a little flip, and for just a second she looked young. Younger than the 17 years of war had any right to leave her. Then the moment passed, and she was Commander Chloe again, all sharp edges and careful control. But something had shifted, subtle as a course correction, significant as a solar flare. Chloe walked to the console built into the observation deck's wall and tapped it with more force than necessary. The screen flickered to life, displaying the current status of the Valiant Echo in cheerful red text that suggested the ship's definition of operational was generous at best. Hull integrity at 63%. Power distribution uneven. Life support functioning but quirky, which was the technical term for might kill everyone at random. See this? She said, gesturing at the display. This is what I should be focused on. Not letters, not feelings, not whatever insanity made you think writing poetry about your commanding officer was a good idea. She scrolled through the damage reports, each one worse than the last. Engineering says we need at least 48 hours in dry dock for critical repairs. Command says we have 12 hours before the next patrol route. The Krell don't care about our maintenance schedule, Michael. They just care about killing us efficiently. I know that, Commander. Do you? She spun to face him, and her ears pinned back again. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're treating this like some kind of romantic drama instead of a war zone. We're not characters in a story. We're soldiers. And soldiers don't get happy endings. We get honorable deaths if we're lucky, and messy ones if we're not. With respect, Commander, that's the bleakest thing I've ever heard. And I once sat through a 3-hour briefing on vacuum exposure symptoms. Chloe's eye twitched. This isn't funny. I'm not laughing. Michael took a step forward, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her amber eyes, the way her ears trembled slightly, even when she was trying to hold them still. I'm just saying that maybe the reason everything feels so bleak is because you've convinced yourself that caring about anything is a liability, that being seen is dangerous, that letting anyone close enough to matter is the same as handing them a weapon to hurt you with. It is, Chloe said flatly. I've watched people I cared about die, Michael. I've held their hands while the medics gave up. I've written letters to families I'll never meet, explaining why their child or parent or sibling isn't coming home. Every single person on this ship is a potential grief I'm carrying in advance, and you want me to add you to that list? To make it personal? To let myself feel something other than tactical necessity? The ship groaned around them, metal settling in the way old things did, and somewhere distant, an alarm beeped twice before someone silenced it. The Echo was holding together through sheer stubbornness, much like its commander. I transferred here on purpose, Michael said quietly. Did you know that? I requested assignment to the Valiant Echo specifically. Chloe's ears perked up slightly. Why? Every officer in the fleet knows this ship is a death sentence. We get the missions no one else wants, the odds no one else will take. Command sees us as expendable. I know. I read your service record first. Well, the parts that aren't classified, which is about 3 sentences and a commendation for valor. But those 3 sentences told me everything I needed to know. Michael's hands weren't shaking anymore. You've never lost a ship, 17 years, dozens of engagements, and you've never lost a single vessel under your command. Ships, yes, crew, yes, but never the ship itself. The Echo has been to hell and back 6 times, and every time you brought her home. That's not, Chloe started, then stopped. That's just luck. Statistics. Probability eventually runs out. Ensign Crace told me you once piloted the ship manually through an asteroid field because the navigation system failed. For 6 hours, without rest. Vela said you talked her through a panic attack during her first battle, while simultaneously coordinating a 3-pronged defense. Ramos claims you can repair a plasma conduit with your eyes closed and one hand tied behind your back, though I think he might have been exaggerating. He was. I need both hands. The point is, Michael pressed on, everyone on this ship knows you're the reason they're alive. You said you can't afford to be seen as human, but Commander, we already see you. All of us. We see you taking the late watches so we can sleep. We see you eating last so there's enough for everyone else. We see you carrying the weight of every decision like you're personally responsible for the entire war. And maybe I'm the only one stupid enough to write it down, but I'm definitely not the only one who thinks you deserve to know that you matter. Not just as a commander, as a person. Chloe stared at him, and for a long moment, her carefully constructed walls visibly cracked. Her ears did something complicated, up, then down, then sideways in a way that suggested her emotional processing systems had encountered a fatal error. She opened her mouth, closed it, then looked down at the letter still in her hand. This is, she started, her voice rough. You can't just, she took a breath, clearly struggling. Damn it, Michael, you're making this very difficult. Good, he said and smiled. Outside, a chunk of debris collided with another, sending both spinning off in opposite directions in a small explosion of sparks. The universe, indifferent to human or alien drama, continued its endless dance. Chloe turned away from Michael and walked back to the viewport, pressing her forehead against the cold glass like it might help organize her thoughts. It didn't. Her reflection stared back at her, looking as confused as she felt, which was somehow worse than looking angry. At least angry was familiar. Angry had kept her alive for 17 years. I should court-martial you, she said to the stars. Article 47, fraternization. Article 12, conduct unbecoming. Article 92, failure to obey a lawful order. There's definitely something in the regulations about not making your commanding officer question her entire life philosophy. I don't think that's actually an article, Commander. I'll write a new one. I have that authority during wartime. She lifted her head, her breath fogging the viewport. Do you know what happens if word gets out about this? If the crew thinks I'm compromised? Soft? They won't think that. You don't know that. Chloe's hands clenched into fists at her sides. I've spent years building a reputation. Ice-cold Chloe. The commander who never breaks. The one who can make the hard calls without flinching. That's what keeps us alive, Michael. Fear and respect and the absolute certainty that I will do whatever it takes to complete the mission. If they see me as someone who can be swayed by emotions, by personal attachments, by, she gestured helplessly with the letter, starlight metaphors, then they'll see you as someone who's fighting for something instead of just fighting, Michael interrupted. They'll see you as someone who hasn't let the war turn them into a machine. Commander, the crew doesn't follow you because they're afraid of you. They follow you because they trust you, because you've earned it, because you care even when you pretend you don't. The ship's intercom crackled to life, startling them both. Commander, to the bridge. We've got a problem. It was Crace, and he sounded worried, which was concerning because Crace's natural state was mildly concerned about everything. Chloe straightened immediately, the commander's mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. Define problem, Lieutenant. Long-range sensors just picked up 3 Krell scouts at the edge of the debris field. They're sweeping the area. Looks like they're searching for survivors to finish off. Time until they reach our position? 90 minutes, maybe less if they're feeling motivated. Chloe's jaw tightened. Status of weapon systems? Aft plasma batteries are offline. Forward cannons are functional, but we're running at 40% charge. Point defense is spotty at best. Chief Ramos says if we fire more than 6 shots, there's a 70% chance the whole system overloads, and we turn into a very expensive firework. Lovely. What about propulsion? There was a pause. Define propulsion in the generous sense of the word. Despite everything, Chloe almost smiled. We can move? We can limp, maybe hide behind something large and pray they don't notice us. The Echo isn't exactly stealthy on her best day, and this is decidedly not her best day. Chloe glanced at Michael, who was watching her with that same steady expression that had gotten him into this mess in the first place. For just a second, she let herself imagine what would happen if the Krell found them. The Echo was barely operational. They couldn't fight, couldn't run. The debris field offered some cover, but not enough. 3 scouts meant 3 times the sensor coverage, 3 times the firepower. 90 minutes wasn't enough time to repair anything critical. They were, in technical terms, completely screwed. Commander? Crace's voice came through the intercom again. Orders? And just like that, the weight settled back onto her shoulders. The letter in her hand suddenly felt absurd, a relic from a different universe where people had the luxury of feelings and futures. She looked at it, at Michael's careful handwriting, at the creases where she'd crumpled it, at the words that had somehow wormed their way past her defenses, and felt something inside her chest twist painfully. Tell Ramos I need every available scrap of power rerouted to sensors and engines, she said, her voice crisp and professional. Have Vela plot us a course through the densest part of the debris field. We're going to play dead, shut down all non-essential systems, minimal life support, no external emissions. If we're lucky, the Krell will assume we're just another piece of wreckage. And if we're not lucky, then we make 6 shots count and hope Ramos's 70% estimate was pessimistic. She paused. And Crace, get everyone into pressure suits. If we have to vent atmosphere to sell the deception, I want minimal casualties. Understood, Commander. Crace out. The intercom clicked off, leaving silence in its wake. Chloe folded the letter carefully, precisely, and tucked it into the inner pocket of her uniform, right over her heart. The gesture was so deliberate that Michael couldn't help but notice. I don't have time for this conversation right now, she said, not looking at him. We have 90 minutes to convince 3 Krell scouts that we're dead, using a ship that's mostly held together with spite and Ramos's questionable engineering decisions. After that, if there is an after that, we'll discuss your complete lack of self-preservation instincts and your terrible taste in women who could absolutely have you executed. My taste is fine, actually, Michael said, and for the record, I think your plan is brilliant. It's barely a plan. It's more of a desperate improvisation. Still brilliant. Chloe finally looked at him, and her ears did that little flip again, the one she couldn't quite control. You're impossible. So I've been told. Michael smiled. Permission to return to my station, Commander? Granted. And Michael? She waited until he met her eyes. Don't die, that's an order. The bridge of the Valiant Echo was dark, lit only by the faint glow of emergency lighting and the occasional flicker of a console that was still pretending to function. Chloe sat in the command chair, her pressure suit sealed, her helmet resting on her lap. Around her, the crew worked in near silence, their movements careful and deliberate. Every sound felt too loud, every breath too obvious. On the main display, 3 Krell scout ships moved through the debris field, like sharks in bloody water, their sensor sweeps painting arcs of detection across the tactical overlay. They were searching methodically, efficiently, and they were getting closer. 40 meters to starboard, Crace whispered, though whispering made no sense in the vacuum of space. They're doing active scans now. If they hit us directly, they won't. Chloe said with more confidence than she felt. We're just another piece of wreckage. Dead systems, no heat signature, minimal mass. As far as their sensors are concerned, we're a very large, very boring chunk of metal. A very large chunk of metal with 73 people breathing inside it, Vela muttered, two of her tentacles nervously coiling around her console. Then breathe quietly. On the screen, the lead Krell scout drifted past their position, so close that Chloe could make out the scoring on its hull from previous battles. Its sensor array rotated, sweeping across the echo like a searchlight looking for signs of life. The bridge held its collective breath. Someone's stomach growled, probably Ramos, and Crace shot him a glare that could have melted hull plating. The scout moved on, then stopped. "Oh no," Vela whispered. The Krell ship rotated slowly, its sensor array focusing back on their position. On the tactical display, the other two scouts began converging, closing the triangle. They'd found something. Maybe a stray energy signature. Maybe a thermal bloom from their minimal life support. Maybe just bad luck, which seemed to be the Echo's specialty. "Commander," Crace said quietly, "they're coming back. I think we're made." Chloe's mind raced through options. They could fire 6 shots, maybe 7 before the weapon system overloaded. Not enough to take down 3 scouts. They could run, except their engines were barely functional, and the Krell were faster. They could surrender, except the Krell didn't take prisoners. They took target practice. She looked around the bridge at her crew, at Crace, who'd been with her for 8 years and still made terrible jokes at the worst times, at Vela, who sent half her pay back to her family on Telvos Prime every month, at Ramos, who was missing an eyebrow and somehow still found reasons to smile, at Michael standing at the auxiliary weapon station, looking at her with that same stupid, fearless expression that had started this whole mess. The letter in her pocket felt warm against her chest, and something inside her, something she'd buried under 17 years of duty and death and difficult choices, quietly rebelled. "Ramos," she said calmly, "how much power do we have in the capacitors?" Enough for maybe 1 good burst." "Why?" "Because I'm tired of playing dead." Chloe stood, her ears snapping upright. "Vela, plot a collision course with that debris cluster at Mark 37. Crace, get ready to light up every single sensor and communication array we have. Make us loud. Make us obvious. Make us look like we're screaming for help." "Commander?" Crace looked confused. "That's the opposite of hiding." "Exactly. The Krell are hunters. They're looking for prey, trying to escape, trying to hide. So we're going to do something they don't expect. We're going to attack." She turned to Michael. "Remember what you said about me never losing a ship?" "Yes, Commander." "Let's keep that streak alive." She sat back down, gripping the armrests. "On my mark, full power to engines. Ramos, I need you to overload the forward plasma conduit. Controlled overload, just enough to make it look like we're dying but defiant. Crace, broadcast a fake distress signal on all frequencies. Make it look like we're calling for reinforcements. Vela, as soon as we start moving, I need you to slingshot us around that debris cluster and straight into the gap between Scouts 2 and 3. "That gap is maybe 300 meters wide," Vela protested. "Then don't hit the sides." Chloe smiled, and it was sharp enough to cut. "They're expecting wreckage. Let's show them what the valiant Echo does best. Survive spite of all evidence to the contrary." The lead Krell scout was less than 100 meters away now, its weapons ports opening like hungry mouths. "Mark," Chloe said. The Echo roared to life. Every system that could make noise made noise. Engines screamed, sensors blazed. The distress signal blasted across every frequency, deliberately sloppy and desperate. The forward plasma conduit overloaded exactly as planned, sending a spectacular plume of superheated gas into space that looked catastrophic but was merely theatrical. And the ship moved, not fast, not gracefully, but with the stubborn determination of something that absolutely refused to die quietly. The Krell scouts scattered in surprise. Nobody expected the wreckage to fight back. And in that moment of confusion, Vela threaded the Echo through the gap like a needle through cloth that was also on fire and possibly screaming. "They're turning," Crace shouted. "Pursuit course, all 3 of them." "Good," Chloe said. "Take us deeper into the debris field. Make them work for it. And somebody find me the densest cluster you can. Something with nice big chunks of sharp metal. What followed was less a tactical engagement and more controlled chaos. The Echo limped through the wreckage at speeds that made the hull groan in protest, while 3 Krell scouts gave chase. Vela piloted like she was possessed, dodging debris that would have shredded their already damaged hull. Ramos kept the engines running through what he later described as applied swearing and theoretical physics. And Chloe called maneuvers that made no tactical sense, but somehow kept working, because the Krell kept expecting rational behavior from a ship that had clearly given up on rationality entirely. "Hard port, now!" Chloe barked, and the Echo swung sideways just as a piece of destroyer hull the size of a building tumbled through where they'd been. One of the Krell scouts wasn't as lucky, or as crazy. It clipped the debris, spun out, and collided with a second scout in a spectacular explosion that lit up the debris field like a brief, violent sun. "One left," Michael called out. "It's breaking off, heading back the way it came." "Let it go," Chloe said, leaning back in her chair. "We can't catch it, and honestly, I think we've traumatized it enough." The bridge was silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then Ramos started laughing. It was half hysteria, half relief, but it was genuine. Vela's tentacles untied themselves and waved in what her species considered a victory dance. Cray slumped over his console and muttered something that sounded like a prayer of thanks to gods he didn't believe in. Michael was looking at Chloe with an expression that was somehow worse than the admiration in his letter. It was pride, like he'd known she could do it, like he'd never doubted. "Status report," Chloe said, trying to sound professional despite the adrenaline singing through her veins. "Hull integrity down to 58%, Crace reported. "Engines are shot. Weapons are shot. Life support is functioning, but Ramos says it's being held together by optimism and spare parts." "Mostly optimism," Ramos confirmed cheerfully. "But we're alive," Vela added. "Against all statistical probability and common sense, we're alive." Chloe stood, her legs surprisingly steady. "Good. Signal the fleet. Tell them we need immediate pickup and full repair facilities. And tell them Commander Chloe and the Valiant Echo are still in business." The crew burst into ragged cheers. Someone started singing something off-key. Crace pulled out a flask from somewhere and took a long drink before passing it to Vela, who passed it to Ramos, who offered it to Chloe. She waved it off and walked to where Michael stood, still at his station, still watching her with those steady eyes. "That was insane," he said quietly so only she could hear. "That was necessary," she corrected. Then softer, "Thank you." "For what?" "For the letter. For the reminder that I'm more than just the sum of my tactical decisions. For being stupid enough to care about someone who spent 17 years forgetting how to let people care about her." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the crumpled paper, now more wrinkled than before but somehow more precious for it. "I'm keeping this. Against regulations, against common sense, against everything I've spent years telling myself about maintaining professional distance. I'm keeping it." Michael's smile could have powered the ship. "Does this mean I'm not getting court-martialed?" "Oh, you're absolutely getting written up," Chloe said, but her ears were doing that uncontrollable flip thing again. "I'm assigning you to permanent bridge duty. Someone needs to keep an eye on you, and it might as well be me. Consider it punishment for making your commanding officer feel things." "Yes, Commander. I'll try to bear it with dignity." "See that you do." She turned to address the bridge. "All right, people, we're not out of this yet. Damage control teams, I want full reports in 30 minutes. Everyone else, secure your stations and get some rest. We've earned it." As the crew dispersed, chattering with the relief of people who'd looked death in the eye and lived to mock it, Chloe stayed at the viewport. Outside, the debris field still drifted in its endless dance, but somehow it looked less like a graveyard and more like a testament, proof that things could be broken and still refuse to stop. Michael appeared beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "So," he said, "about that laugh you mentioned in the letter, the one you barely do anymore." Chloe felt it bubbling up despite herself, real, genuine, unguarded. It surprised her how easy it was, how natural, like remembering a language she'd forgotten she spoke. She laughed, and in the reflection of the viewport, Her ears stood up straight and joyful, and she looked for just a moment like someone who remembered what it meant to be more than just a survivor. Like Starlight, Michael thought but didn't say. Exactly like Starlight. The valiant Echo limped toward the rendezvous coordinates, damaged but defiant, carrying its crew and its commander toward whatever came next. Together. The end. We've reached the end of this story. Now I want to ask you, if you were in Michael's place, would you have the courage to write that letter? Would you risk everything, your career, your honor, perhaps your life, just to say you care about someone? Or if you were Chloe carrying the weight of so many lives on your shoulders, could you leave yourself vulnerable? Sometimes the bravest thing we can do isn't facing enemy ships or overcoming impossible odds. Sometimes it's being honest about how we feel, even when everything tells us to stay silent. Sometimes survival isn't just about surviving the battle, it's about remembering what we were fighting for in the first place. If you enjoyed this journey aboard the Valiant Echo, subscribe to Warame Nashern, Sci-Fi Pulse, Sumituri Sikinen, for more stories exploring the human heart against the backdrop of distant stars. If Commander Chloe and Michael's story touched you, click the like button and let us know in the comments which character you connected with the most or what you think will happen next for our defiant crew. And until our next story, keep looking up.